Hey guys, welcome back. So now getting into more Miles Morales, I wanted to talk about that one time that he became Captain Universe, to where of course he wasn't the first Spider-Man to do this, but when he did, it was a pretty insane combination with his unique skill set. And just as a disclaimer, there will be some spoilers for Spider-Man on PS4. For anyone who hasn't played it, I get it, I was late too. And I feel like I also gotta say possibly spoilers for Spider-Man Miles Morales, because he's in this story as well, because it may explain why in the game trailers, why we see that Miles of Earth 1048 in a New York City without Peter Parker, which is a strong maybe. Like it's a strong maybe. But I felt like I gotta say it. So let's get into it. But first, if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to catch the spills every week. And don't forget to hit that bell up top so we can squad up in the comments for the first hour. Alright, so jumping right in, this takes place within Spider-Geddon, which was like your reassimilation of the Spider Army who had came together during the course of the Spider-Verse event. And to make Spider-Geddon make sense, briefly I want to talk about a few things from Spider-Verse, just so I don't lose anybody who's only familiar with the Miles Morales film. And so starting with Spider-Verse, which was pretty much every Spider-Man, Spider-Woman, Spider-Pig, everyone you can think of and more coming together, but what had actually brought this about was something that had taken place within Original Sin. Because at that time when Orb had taken the Eye of the Watcher, and with doing so he had revealed many of the secrets which the Watcher had seen, this had then revealed a number of things to many people, including Peter Parker, who discovered that Cindy Moon had been bitten by the same radioactive spider and locked away by Ezekiel Sims. But with Peter discovering this, he then immediately went to go let her out, because at this point she's been locked up for about 12 or 13 years. But at this point, what Peter was unaware of is that this also got the attention of the Inheritors, who are a super ancient family who originate from Earth 1, and they feed off of the life force of totems, which in general the totems are a system of avatars who connect to a higher deity or energy, but for the most part the Inheritors, they sought after the spider totems to whom are connected to the web of life and destiny. And when Cindy Moon was revealed, this then triggered their hunt. And there's quite a bit that happens from there throughout the edge of Spider-Verse to Spider-Verse, but I'm gonna try to breeze through all that in like a minute some change, and we'll see how that goes. But with this hunt that began from the Inheritors, we find out how crazy it is throughout the course of Superior Spider-Man, because when the Superior Spider-Man, aka Otto Octavius, he runs into Spider-Man 2099, who had came back in time to protect Tyler Stone at Horizon Labs, but of course that had went left, and when the lab exploded, Superior Spider-Man then got sent to the future directly into the year 2099, which he totally didn't understand why this was happening, but he essentially chalked it up to the universe using him to replace the Spider-Man that was missing from that time. But of course he wasn't trying to stay here, so immediately with him working on his way back, instead of finding his way directly back in time, he then discovered that he was arriving in different realities, to where a number of these Spider-Men in these different realities were all being hunted down. And amongst them there's like your Spider-Man from the Fantastic Five, another version of Iron Spider from Civil War, and on another Earth even a variant of your Spider Armor Spider-Man, who I guess wore that armor all the time. But this then caused Otto Octavius to start investigating, and with doing so he traced back the visitor who was jumping between these different Earths, which from here then led him to Earth 2818, to where he came across Karn, one of the members of the Inheritors. And when Otto got there, like this wasn't no brawl at all. And really it was just him getting this Spider-Man out of there before they both got themselves killed. Because the Inheritors, like these guys ain't no joke. And when Otto dropped this dude underneath a collapsing building and Karn just got back up like it was nothing, immediately Otto was like, you know what, we out. But this was then the beginning of Otto Octavius going around the multiverse and putting together this Spider Army, which initially he thought was needed just to take on the One, but even in that attempt, he found out quickly that they still weren't enough. And at this point, we're still talking about the children. Like, we ain't even got the Papa Bear yet. But when they're trying to take down Karn, it wasn't long before they found out that even their group efforts had little to no effect, because the dude was just taking everything they threw at him and he just kept coming. And to raise the difficulty from impossible to that ain't it, chief, all the way up to that's not gonna happen, they were all then met by Karn's twin siblings, Bora and Brix, who from there they got in a scuffle with Karn, fighting over the food, and more so in a competitive way with them competing for the hunt. But with doing so, this then gave Otto and the others the opportunity to get away. But with doing so, Otto Octavius, his team eventually crossed his path with Miles Morales and a few other Spider-Man who were attacked by the Inheritors on Earth 1610, which eventually then led him to realize that there was a whole nother team of Spider-Men comprised of men and women who were led by 616 Peter Parker. But this then gave them much greater numbers. And for anyone who's confused on how we got Superior Spider-Man, who's 616 Otto Octavius in the body of Peter Parker, who's now fighting side by side with Peter Parker, That's a weird explanation within itself too, because remember, through Spider-Verse, Otto Octavius, he was only missing from the 616 for 24 hours, and when he eventually went back, he ended up giving Peter his body back while telling Peter more or less that he was the more superior Spider-Man, which in turn brought back the return of Peter Parker. But this didn't necessarily mean the end of Otto Octavius in a superior Spider-Man-like form, which is something that comes later, but we'll get to that part of the web of this storyline in a little bit. And I was just thinking, man, like, it's one thing knowing what happened in Edge of Spider-Verse and Spider-Geddon, as well as the connective issues which pour into it, but for me, like, not until this moment, I'm thinking like, man, it is hard to try to break this down for somebody, because it's a lot of narratives webbed together which take these stories from one to the next. But either way, with Peter Parker from 616 and Superior Spider-Man teaming up, like, of course you know that Otto wants to be definitively in charge. But overall, 616 Peter Parker was chosen to be the leader because, unlike Otto, who had studied the Inheritors for weeks, Peter Parker had actually faced them off a few times solo and lived to tell the tale. And so everybody was pretty much like, yep, he's the leader. But at this point, with both teams joining together and using Earth 13 as a meeting ground, because regardless of wherever they went, the Inheritors would eventually find a way to reach them. But at least here on Earth 13, you had your Captain Universe Spider-Man, who was always Captain Universe, or at least when he became Captain Universe, he just didn't give up the Enigma Force. But because of that and the reasoning that he was so powerful, they were just pretty much like, well, the Inheritors, they won't come here, because if they do, Captain Universe would just destroy them and that'll be it. And in his case, this would only work on Earth 13, because if he left this universe, the Enigma Force would not follow and then he'd just be Spider-Man. But while they're here in the quote-unquote safe zone, Solus arrives, who's like the patriarch of the Inheritors, and when he arrives, he has no worries about their Captain Universe or none of that. And it's a bit disturbing, aside from the other Spider people getting ate left and right, or being eaten left and right. But with Solus arriving, your Captain Universe Spider-Man was pretty confident that the Enigma Force was just gonna take this dude out. But what he didn't realize with giving Solus the full brunt of the Enigma Force is that this energy which trickles down from the Unipower is that this energy is essentially life energy in its rawest form, which is exactly what these Inheritors consume from every last one of these Spider-Men. In Earth 13 Captain Universe, he's no different, and when he tries to use it against Solus, Solus just consumes it along with him as well. And just like that, the safe zone turns into the it ain't safe zone. But I also want to put quite a bit of emphasis on this moment, because in Spider-Verse it made it pretty clear that being Captain Universe alone, that clearly just wasn't enough. But getting into the conclusion of Spider-Verse, I do want to emphasize that the Inheritors, that they are not invincible, and in the rare event that they would need some form of regeneration, on Earth 802, they had a cloning facility which was destroyed by Kane Parker and Black Widow, which initially was part of the plan, but Kane had took it to the next level, and after destroying their cloning facility, he then went directly after Solus, their leader. But after doing this, Kane was then defeated, and his blood was taken along with baby Benji Parker from Earth 982 and Cindy Moon as well, which was enough for them to start the ceremony, to where with sacrificing them at the Web of Destiny, it would then mean the end of every Spider-Man in the multiverse. But with arriving here, Otto Octavius had the bright idea of killing the Master Weaver of the Web of Life and Destiny, and it was almost like, hey, I killed the guy, you can't do it now, right? Like, I think of this as an absolute win. But for the record, the Master Weaver's place was later taken by Karn, who was really like your black sheep outcast of the Inheritors, who really only hunted with them to survive. So it really wasn't a tough decision for him to make to turn against them. But all in all, the Spider Army was able to end this when 616 Peter Parker sent Moreland to the radioactive world of 3145, and with doing so, they had thrown the backed up conscience of their father Solus in there as well, so the others had to follow. And at the end of Spider-Verse, this was pretty much just their prison, and they were stuck here for years with nothing to consume, which was pretty rough with them being immortal. But this is what takes us over to Spider-Geddon, where we check back up with them years later, to where at this point the Spider-Man had been sending in their drones in order to monitor the Inheritors, but with doing so, they were destroying the drones and collecting the parts in order to eventually use them to find a way out. But not long after this, it had been alerted to the Spider Army that somebody was using the Inheritors tech, which ultimately was something really bad, because with doing so, this would then provide a doorway for the Inheritors to come back. And when we see the Spider Army arrive to tell Miles, it's shortly after when we find out who's been using the tech, to whom of course is Otto Octavius, who now at this point in time is the Superior Octopus, because after returning to Earth 616 24 hours after he had disappeared during Spider-Verse, he had then gave Peter Parker back his body, but then after that he used the Jackal's cloning technology to build himself another body that this time was a hybrid between himself and Peter Parker. But eventually what he ended up doing was using the Inheritors technology along with what he learned from the Jackal, and in addition to his own modifications, in order to produce backups of himself at any point in time from anywhere. But as it turns out, Karn, who's the new Master Weaver, he had told the different Spider-Men that with Octavius doing this, that not only could he port from anywhere into these bodies, but his family, the Inheritors, they could do so as well. And this is why once they figured out what Otto was up to, they immediately went to his lab and was like, yo, we gotta shut this down. But at this point, that didn't even matter because the Inheritors had tapped in from Earth 3145 and they had reconstructed themselves with like the 3 body templates that Norman had ready for himself, which then allowed them to arrive here at full strength. And when they showed up, immediately, Spider-Man Noir, dead. Spider-Man UK, done. And just as a little odd fact, like they didn't find Norman Osborn appetizing, and mainly because what he had brought himself to be at this point, they had just considered him to be a spider totem pretender. But with this happening and bringing the Inheritors back into full effect, or at least at this point Moreland, Verna, and Jennings. But with them arriving here, Otto was like, okay, it's time to dip. But at this point, Miles, who through the course of Spider-Geddon, he kind of takes the role that Peter took within Spider-Verse, with stepping up into that positive role of leadership, other than Otto Octavius, who's just like, yo, we gotta kill these dudes. Because Miles, much like Peter, believes that there's a way to save people without just outright killing the threat. But the way that they get out of here is Earth 65 Spider-Gwen. She tells the others that she'll hold off the Inheritors, which initially just sounds like a suicide mission, but with doing so, her plan is just to distract them long enough for the others to get out, then she can use her wrist teleporter and then make her way to safety. But with doing this, she underestimates Verna's speed, and the others don't see her come out behind them. But when Otto does a search with his Octobots around the city to see if the Inheritors made it out or where they have went, they not only discovered that Verna had Gwen's wrist device, but also at this point the Inheritors had restored all their siblings. But after this, when they go to speak to Karn at the Web of Life and Destiny, it's here where we see Miles step more into that leadership role. Because when they get here and they're like, goodness, what are we gonna do? Otto's pretty much like, man, I told y'all we should have killed them fools in the last major event. But out of everyone, Miles is the first one to step up and get in his face, like, first of all, this is your fault. And the previous plan would have been a solid one if Otto had left the Inheritors technology alone, rather than just pave the way for them to come back. But after they leave here, they pretty much split up to find their solutions, with Miles looking for 616 Peter and Otto going throughout the multiverse to find other Spider-Men. But when they leave Karn here, he's then met with the arrival of his sister Verna, who pretty much shows up to get him his payback for betraying their family, and on top of that becoming the Master Weaver, which is a detail that did not play in his favor when his sister returned, because for Karn, becoming the Master Weaver, it then made him a spider totem of which his sister could consume, to where of course she did, but not before Karn could use the Web of Life and Destiny to pull a couple strings, pun intended, to help out the Spider Army. But after this, with Miles going to find Peter, only to find that Peter's being attacked by Moreland, but also while this is happening, Otto Octavius then redons his superior Spider-Man suit before he makes his way out to the different Earths in order to recruit all the help that they can get. And it's here within Spider-Geddon when Otto jumps to Earth 1048, which is the home of your PS4 Spider-Man universe. And he's like, hurry Spider-Man, PS5 leaks is going ham. No, I'm just playing, that wasn't even a thing back then. But when Otto gets here, he persuades this Peter Parker of Earth 1048 to assist him and the others in stopping the Inheritors, which he explains to this Peter by pretty much giving him the whole Spider-Verse breakdown. And with doing so, even being transparent about himself being Otto Octavius and not Peter Parker. But with doing so, sparing Peter of a few other details. But with arriving here and helping your PS4 Peter Parker take down the current villain who he is facing, who's really just a dude running around looking like Spider-Man, but with Otto making an agreement to help Peter take this guy down, and after that he would then help Otto. Before they leave, Peter first stops to see Miles, telling him that he's pretty much got to be Spider-Man while he's gone, because at this point he's been training Miles for some time. And really this was what I was referring to as far as your Earth 1048 Miles Morales, and the possibility of the situation to where his PS5 adventures taking place within this window where his Peter Parker is involved with Spider-Geddon, while Miles is holding it down as Spider-Man in the meantime. Because even at this point here, Earth 1048 Miles, he's been training with this Peter Parker, and though he's still fairly new, he does have a level of training at this point to where he can be your friendly neighborhood Miles Morales. But after this Peter then leaves with Otto as their recruitment continues to where they make their way to Earth 51778 to recruit the Japanese Spider-Man and his giant Leopardon Megazord robot. And it's pretty funny because as soon as they arrive here and they teleport inside to speak to him, like not long after Otto tells him that the Inheritors have come back, Otto immediately starts telling him how to do his job. And he's like, pretty much, you know, that big old sword that you got, I'm gonna need you to start leading with that. But in addition, with the Inheritors coming back, Otto lets him know, like, this time we're not putting them in timeout, but instead it's gonna be lights out. Because at this point, he's sick of Inheritors. Hire some help, get rid of Inheritors. but it's also here in the Leopardon where Otto continues to recruit other Spider-Men, including 616 Ben Reilly, Earth 44-145 Norman Osborn, Spider-Punk, and a number of others. But it's also here where 1610/616 Miles, he reaches out to Otto and lets him know, like, hey, we don't have a whole lot of time, we need to make a move, so like, is you with us or not? And initially Otto's like, no, because they need a plan, and they need as much help as they can get, or the inheritors will just run right through them. But on the flip side, Miles is like, we need to act now, before they bring back their father Solace, and their chances of winning get 100 times slimmer. But even though bringing back their father is taking more time to do, mainly because they have to complete more steps of the process, and in addition they claim the technology isn't up to par for them to complete his cloning as quickly as they would like, especially with the aging being the most difficult part. But with Miles and his team making their way here and using Spider-Ham to do some reconnaissance, they had then planned to just blow the whole laboratory sky high and send the new body of Solace back to Formula. But their cover is pretty much blown when the inheritors follow the scent of honey baked ham, which then lead them right back to Miles' team. And I'm pretty sure in this moment Miles is thinking like, I probably shouldn't have sent Spider-Ham, who smells like the grocery deli, down to go check out what was going on. But with them getting caught and nearly coming to the decision of blowing up the laboratory with themselves in there, and with doing so, like Miles in this moment, like Miles pretty much had a Thanos moment, like in Endgame when Thanos was getting destroyed by Scarlet Witch, because here when Miles is getting the life sucked out of him, he then tells Penny Parker to detonate her suit, and more or less she's like, but Saya, the troops, and Miles is just like, do it. But fortunately enough, Otto and the others arrive, and mainly because Otto realizes that their chances are much greater if Miles and the others don't get themselves killed. So with cutting their way inside of here with a sort of vigor, it allows them to get Miles and the others out and away from the inheritors just before this whole thing turns into a bloodbath. And with getting out of there, of course Otto has his gripes with Miles, but even still with Miles making this hasty move, he was able to get a bit more information which would later assist the whole team. But it's also around this time when Norman Osborn, he comes to his own conclusion that this whole thing's gonna get ugly, and if the inheritors win, then everything's gonna be lost, every world, and for that reason perhaps there should be a greater sacrifice in order to assure their victory, and that sacrifice being the Spider Army if need be. But also at this time elsewhere, throughout the events of Spider-Force, which is your tie-in to Spider-Geddon, you have Jessica Drew Spider-Woman who was recruited by Kane, the Scarlet Spider, to help them out with the return of the inheritors. And prior to this point, of course, she was watching her daughter, but she then agreed to come along and help them out because ultimately this would help protect her daughter. But with her agreeing to come along and help Kane Parker, they then teamed up with Spider-Kid from Earth 218 and also Ashley Barton, the Spider-Woman of Earth 807-128, and Jessica Drew led them on a mission to pretty much make sure that the inheritors didn't get their hands on the consciousness of Solace, but that plan completely went left when she fell into their trap, which caused her to bring it right to them. With at this point over in Spider-Geddon, his shell of a body is already prepared, and the only thing he needs at this point is his consciousness. And now that the inheritors have it, they're able to fully restore their father. But jumping back over to the Spider Army, it's at this point where we get this pretty cool moment between your Earth 616 Miles Morales and your PS4 Earth 1048 Peter Parker. Because it's around this time where he takes a moment to commend Miles for his leadership, because it's here where he gets a glimpse of the potential that's within Miles back home. And even though this Miles doesn't feel like he's being the best leader, Earth 1048 Peter Parker assures him that he's doing much better than he thinks. And Miles lets him know, like, when you get back home, tell your Miles I said hey. And it's pretty much here where we get the notion that when Peter goes back, that he'll take heavy inspiration from this Miles Morales suit and take those ideas over to Miles on Earth 1048. But not too long after this, when everyone makes their way over to Loom World, Norman Osborn then implements his plan of sacrificing the few in order to save the many. And with doing this, he then takes a piece of the web of life and destiny, but with doing so, he then destroys the rest of it, and effectively trapping the rest of the Spider Army on the same world with the inheritors, but now with no way of traveling through the multiverse. And so initially when this happens, not only is it just the beginning of the betrayals, or at least how it would seem, but for everybody who's still here, it's kind of time to freak out. But at this point, it's not long before they realize that this was done by Norman Osborn, being that he was straight up just MIA at the time of betrayal, but also when Miles tries to pull everyone else together to kind of figure out what's the next move, what's the next plan, or even how they're going to resolve this, immediately after they then realize that Otto is missing. And as it turns out, Otto had some plans of his own with 616 Ben Reilly, that entailed them going directly to the inheritors themselves. But when they both go there, it isn't long before we find out that Otto had made a deal directly with the inheritors that included handing over Ben Parker as dinner for 5. But essentially Otto's proposition, which aside from handing over Ben, it was a very Norrin Rad Silver Surfer type of offer, because Otto told him that he would find other dimensions and food for them to survive as long as they spare his world, which on the surface is something that Solace agrees to. But then again, and maybe it's just me, but I kind of got this thing about trusting people whose eyes glow in the dark. And so who's to say that the inheritors would have truly kept their end of the bargain? But at this point in time, back with Miles and the others, who at this point are really just trying to find some type of solution for what to do, but with doing so, they then make contact with the Enigma Force of this universe in hopes of getting whatever help they can, so that they can even have a chance at facing the inheritors. And initially when they contact the Enigma Force, it's first like, okay, none of you are worthy, and most everyone is like, yeah, you're right. But once again, Miles steps forward and like just keeping it real, he's like, okay, like who is worthy? And on top of that, like what does that even mean? Because at this point, who cares about people's past mistakes? We're here fighting for the sake of the multiverse, and doing so against another threat that killed a version of you in another universe. And he lets the Enigma Force know, like, if you're waiting here for somebody perfect, then you're essentially just waiting for a day that's never gonna come. And he gives the Enigma Force the ultimatum, like, look, if you want to help us, cool, but if not, we're still gonna go and we're gonna try and stop these guys with or without you. But from here we jump back over to Otto, who has nobly sacrificed Ben Parker instead of himself to save the many. But it's at this moment where he's tracked down by Spider-Man from Earth 1048, and when he gets there, he's like, man, you just another Otto Octavius, I thought you was different. And at this point in time, 1048 Peter Parker, he's come to learn more about Otto Octavius, from him taking Peter Parker's body, to him dealing with Hydra, and from learning that and then now seeing him betray everybody, it really just crushes his hopes of this being the Otto Octavius who somehow was better than the one he'd known from his home world. But with realizing all of this, he then believes that this Otto is the worst one ever. But as it turns out, with Otto turning over Ben to the inheritors, that this was a bit of a Trojan horse situation. Because for the inheritors, when they absorb the life force from any spider totem, they also get a taste of their memories as well. And as many of you may already know, Scarlet Spider has been through it. And I think like at this point he's died like 27 times, and much of which with a jackal who had killed him and brought him back to life repeatedly, which then caused him to be damaged, and later become the jackal himself. And so when the inheritors try to feed on him, they would then experience death over and over again. And when Peter from Earth 1048 had seen this, there was a bit of relief because he was like, oh man, you're not as bad as I thought you were. And it's like, you're not necessarily good, but you're not that bad. But this moment of relief is shortly indulged when the inheritors then come for them after they realize what's going on. But fortunately enough, they're saved by the web when Miles and the others arrive, and when they do, Miles Morales is now Captain Universe. Which on one hand is like, woo, this is great, but at the same time, it kind of has you thinking like, wait, this is how the other one died. So immediately it has you thinking like, what's going to be different this time around? And we quickly get that answer, because it's here where Miles mentions that he learned some of the things, or better yet, he picked up a couple of pointers from where the other Captain Universe had messed up. And first and foremost, he realizes that Captain Universe, he had let Solace get his hands on him, and with doing so, it's almost as if he describes it as Solace used him as a straw to not only suck the life out of that spider totem, but also consume that Enigma Force as well. So for Miles, he's like, nah, I ain't gonna let that happen. And with doing so, he makes sure that the entire time, to where he's fighting Solace, or even if any of the other inheritors try to grab him, that he's gonna keep his distance and make sure that he doesn't get hemmed up. Which fortunately for Miles is like watching a friend play a game and then they get destroyed, but with seeing that, like with their noble sacrifice, you then know how to beat the boss. Or at least you then got the idea of what not to do. But it's also here where we get another glimmer of hope when Spiderling, Spider-Girl, and May Parker Spider-Woman show up. And this is pretty huge, because through the events of Spider-Girls, we're filled in that they were able to retrieve a piece of the Web of Life and Destiny, but on top of that, it also helps that Spiderling, she's the new pattern maker, which means that she can piece it back together. Which also makes it possible for the Cavalry to come in, including Earth 616 Peter Parker, Earth 65 Spider-Gwen, and a ton of others. But with this happening is also some credit to Karn, who had mentioned earlier who was the inheritor who had became the Master Weaver, and before his death he was pulling strings like saving Gwen Stacy and doing what he could to help the Spider Army out. But when they arrive here, of course Miles is happy to see Gwen and know that she's alive, and Solace is pretty much like, ooh look, he's distracted, let me go grab him. But even though he tried, Miles then shows us again something different with him being Captain Universe and combining a concussive blast from the Enigma Force, which of course Solace cannot directly consume, but Miles uses this and he combines it with his Venom blast, which in this case with him being Captain Universe, it doesn't super drain him like it normally would. But on top of the strike and move maneuver, in addition to combining the Enigma Force with his Venom Blast, he then pulls out the big joker, and he then uses the Japanese sword vigor against Solace, and with it he pulls off the crazy Capcom KO. And it's crazy because it's like KO. And when he does this, like, Solace is done. And as far as the other inheritors, like when they see this, they're completely distraught, so they just blindly go rushing for Miles. But with them doing so, Miles also uses the Enigma Force to keep them at distance, which is the method that has been working great so far, and it's one of those things like, hey, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But with doing so, it then allows the entire Spider army to all rush in and web these guys up. Because if there's a solution that they can come to without having to kill any of these other guys, then by all means, that's what they're aiming to do. And the thing is, like, while they're figuring out what's the next step and what they're gonna do with these guys, and they come to the conclusion of using their technology to transfer their bodies into newer modified bodies that in this case would be little babies. And on top of that, their modification would be that they wouldn't need to feed on spider totems, but in addition to that, they would now have the opportunity to be raised differently, and in this case, hopefully with better parenting than Solace. Because within their database, we actually found out that Solace modified himself in the children and forcibly instilled their hunger within them, which now Octavia Otto, she was now able to remove that all completely. But in addition to this, they then get Moreland, who all this time was being held by the NYPD with a ton of tranquilizers in his system, which were courtesy of 616 Peter Parker. And when he arrived, they pretty much just turned him into a regular eating baby as well. But at this point, there was still the issue of like, who's gonna raise these kids? Which as it turned out, like this was a task perfectly suited for Spider-Man, also known as May Riley from Earth 3123, who from here took on the duty of raising them just to be better people. And as far as Miles, now that everything is done, the Enigma Force then leaves him, returning him back to his former state. But after this, with everything pretty much resolved and everyone going back to their home worlds, Otto more or less apologizes to Spider-Man from Earth 1048 for being less than honest the whole time. And before that Peter leaves, he lets Otto know that he does recognize that he did the right thing in the end, unlike the Otto Octavius from his world. But before he leaves, he also lets him know that he believes that this Otto could be everything that he believed he was because there's still hope for him. And so real quick, I just want to give a shout out to all the Patreons. Thank you guys for all of your support, and for anyone who's new here and you want more information on how to support the channel, I got a link in the description where you can head to patreon.com/DopeSpill. Alright, so yeah, when I first mapped out this video, I thought it was gonna be like under 10 minutes, but then when I started recording, I was like, let me make sure I don't lose anybody. Because at the end of the day, so many readers are at so many places, and you really just don't know who all read what. But either way, hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and also some of your theories of how you believe that this story may even tie in to what we may see in the future with both Spider-Man Miles Morales and even later on with the Spider-Man sequel. Because I think it would be amazing if Insomniac Games kept the continuity intact with Earth 1048, even if it's just as a reference. But let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and we'll do it again in the next one. Alright, later.